This video is about how life can either be a tragedy or a comedy, depending on how real or unreal you choose to be. One thing that I'm really noticing recently is that life becomes a tragedy the more that you resist. Because when you start resisting life, the only way you can do that is by performing and putting a mask on of ego instead of actually just being present in your life. The more that you perform, the more of a tragedy life becomes, because you end up resisting the call of the adventure inside you to face yourself, face life, grow real. And so ultimately, life can either be a tragedy because you keep performing your way through it, or you can let go and allow it to be a comedy because life just performs itself and you play a role within that performance. In ancient times, like ancient Greece, a tragedy was really just any story that went from a state of stability to a kind of sad or unhappy ending. And a comedy was vice versa. In those terms, the biggest tragedy of all time is that we're born real and then we get corrupted by the world. We pick up all kinds of conditioning, emotional blocks, mental blocks, and we become unreal. That's the saddest thing that can happen to a human being, because it means they become detached from the flow of life and what it actually means to be human, a real human being, to keep growing, evolving, going deeper into wholeness instead of fragmentation. A comedy, in the sense that I'm using it in this video, doesn't mean that life is always hilariously funny, which is how we use the word comedy in modern language. I'm talking more about the divine comedy, which actually transcends the positive and the negative and just becomes a kind of flow. It's almost like you're living in a joke, but the joke doesn't have a punchline. There's just that tension between being a human and being able to surrender to something bigger. Life, chaos, God, truth, whatever you want to call it. When you surrender to that, you see that life is a big joke without a punchline. And you can flow with it, and you don't need to perform and put on the mask, because you're just moving with real life from one second to the next. The opposite of that is the tragedy. Like I said in the intro to the video, you resist it by putting the mask on, and instead of moving with life, you move against it. That's always ego. The opposite of ego is reality. And the more that you choose ego over reality, the more of a performance life becomes, and the more tragic it becomes. Because you go from that state of stability and realness to unreality, because the ego is unreal. You resist facing yourself, embracing the shadow self, and facing life. And the more you understand this, the more real life gets, and the more you can laugh at the big joke, even if you don't necessarily get it. One of the biggest problems that we can cause for ourselves is taking life too seriously. That always stems from taking ourselves too seriously, because we put the mask of ego on to try and keep the shadow self at bay. And so then everything becomes so serious, because we're constantly trying to control things and keep reality at bay so we don't have to face our fears about ourselves. The main two reasons that we take life too seriously and take ourselves too seriously are because our nervous system is dysregulated, and so we don't feel safe. We think that everything's a threat, including our own emotions. And then the second reason is because we feel like we're not good enough. In other words, we got shame. Shame is just a disconnection from the truth, and it's the idea that I am not good enough as I am. And if you've got a dysregulated nervous system and you feel that you've got a lot of shame inside, that you're not good enough as you are, then those two things feed off of each other, and you end up forcing yourself against life and trying to control it so that you don't have to face the fear that is within you, the fear that you're not good enough. And so you just end up pushing against things. But when you do that, when you force life, you take yourself out of the flow, and it opens up a negative spiral where things just get more and more unreal, and therefore they become more and more tragic. Because the most tragic thing of all is having the opportunity to grow real and dying after having lived an unreal life. And so the way forwards is to undo the damage of the things that are making you take life so seriously that you can't see the big joke, including yourself. When you're dysregulated, then the tragedy just gets worse. And really, if you think about it, it makes sense. If your nervous system is stuck in fight or flight mode. You're in hyper arousal all the time, and you're constantly looking around for threats, and everything seems like it can destroy you at any moment, even just at a subtle unconscious level, then it's quite unlikely that you're going to see the joke and just let go and have a laugh at yourself, your problems, life itself. On the other side of the coin, you might not be in hyper arousal, you might be in hypo arousal. You've had so much fight or flight that your nervous system's collapsed, you've gone into shutdown, and then you stop taking action, you stop moving with life, you kind of just roll over and think that you can't handle anything because you're done. If you're in either of those states, hyper arousal or hypo arousal, then the tragedy is just going to pull you in more and more. You're never going to be able to transcend yourself because the two nervous system states of dysregulation, hyper arousal and hypo arousal, just keep you more entrenched in the ego. They make you think that you need the mask, because the mask is something that you put on to survive. And when you're in a dysregulated nervous state, survival is really the only thing that you care about. But actually, the joke is, we don't need to hold on to survive. We can kind of let go of those patterns that we picked up, that we installed as software in our minds way back when, to try and survive the past. Because the past is the past, and here we are in the present. And the joke is always there, waiting for you to laugh along with it. If nervous system regulation makes you assume that I am not safe all the time, which keeps you out of the comedy and puts you in the tragedy, then the other thing that makes it even worse is shame. Shame is just the internalized belief that I am not good enough as I am. It's really that simple. Once you've picked up that belief that I am not good enough as I am, especially when you feel unsafe with a dysregulated nervous system, so you can't feel your way through the fear of that shame being true, which it never is, because shame is just a disconnection from the truth. When you've picked up that shame, then you have to put on a mask, aka the ego. You put on the mask so that you can pretend to be a version of yourself who doesn't have to deal with all of the things about you that are very real, that got shamed in the first place. And it can be anything. Good emotions, bad emotions, just the way you look, literally anything. Whatever has made you feel like I am not good enough as I am is going to cause you to perform your way through life so that you can avoid judgment, so you can avoid finding out that the shame is true. And so then you just get caught up in forcing life away from you and not accepting it and embracing it as it is. And then the tragedy again becomes more tragic, because how can you laugh at a great joke? How can you find humor in things? How can you flow if you think that everything is so serious because you're not safe and you're not good enough? The way into real life is to let go of both of those illusions so that you can put yourself back in the flow and find something true. In general then, I am not safe and I am not enough. I usually just bullshit, they're illusions. That doesn't mean that sometimes we can be in physical danger. Of course we can. If I'm in these ferns right now and a tiger comes running towards me, which God forbid is not going to happen, then yeah, I would not be safe in that moment. The kind of safety I'm talking about is safe to just be. Most of the time that's fine, but we confuse physical danger and emotional discomfort, which just means we have emotional stuff going on inside of us and we confuse that for something that's actually a threat, project it out into the world, and then the shit hits the fan basically. It's not real. And it's the same with I am enough as I am. That is always true. Of course we can always learn more skills or new skills, we can level up in certain ways, we can become better at doing things, but that doesn't change the fundamental truth that I am enough as I am right now, that I have every reason on God's green earth to accept myself. The more I accept myself and know that I'm safe, the more I can put myself in the flow, the more I can actually show up as I'm supposed to show up, as a real human being. And so if you find that your life is becoming a tragedy, you're always down, there's always drama, there's always some kind of nonsense that you'd rather not deal with, then you can probably assume that at some level you've picked up those core assumptions about yourself that are unreal. You think that you're not safe to feel what you feel, to be what you are, to do what you need to do, and you feel like you're not enough. So you're judging yourself and tripping over yourself and never moving forwards into deeper wholeness. When you kill those two illusions, which you can do, then life becomes more real. And then you step into that divine comedy where you're part of life instead of some tragic observer standing on the outside, looking in and wondering what the hell is going on. There's only one way out of the tragedy and back into real life, and that's to shift from resistance to acceptance. I am not safe when you're safe, and I am not enough as I am when you are both forms of resistance that keep you out of real life and cause you to end up defending your ego. The resistance occurs because you're resisting the call to adventure, as they call it in the hero's journey. The call to adventure is always the call to return back to wholeness and integration within yourself, to give up the mask of the ego, which is what causes resistance and self-judgment and makes the nervous system fear actual feelings and emotions. It causes you to see them as physical danger instead of emotional discomfort, which anybody can handle. Emotional discomfort, not physical danger. And so when you're lost in the ego like that, you just end up defending the ego and keeping the shadow self at bay. That is the real adventure. Facing your shadow and returning back home to wholeness and integration. And so if you feel like you're on that tragic path, you're moving more towards tragedy than letting go and finding the divine comedy, then it means ultimately it's time to stop resisting the call to adventure and start doing some shadow work. Facing the parts of yourself that you've been scared to face. Feeling the feelings you've been scared to feel. Chasing the goals or making moves with the goals that you know are real, but you're scared to move forward with because you're worried about that judgment that you feel for yourself, because the ego is always rooted in that. You're worried that that judgment you feel for yourself is going to be reflected in the world. You feel like you can't trust yourself and you can't trust life because you're caught up in the tragedy. And so the way out is to do shadow work so that you can do your best, i.e. take the actions you can take and then let go of the rest, i.e. let life do the things you can't do and trust life to take you where you need to be as part of the big cosmic joke. Well, here's a big block of concrete with a rood on top, a crucifix. So that's rather exciting. It might be a bit of a generalization and a bold claim, but if you're one of those people that takes life too seriously, then you might think it's because of the way the world is, the way that your life has configured itself, etc, etc, some external thing. But actually what I'm going to say is that the only reason we take life too seriously is because we're caught up in the tragedy. We're taking the tragedy as being reality itself, but it's not. The tragedy is just a misperception that we buy into when we're filtering everything through the ego because we think I am not safe and I am not enough as I am. That means that we are dysregulated and we have emotional stuff that is not integrated, and so we buy into the shame, which is just the disconnection from the truth that makes us feel like we have to constantly judge ourselves and control life to keep that judgment at bay. It's not really the shame that's the problem. That's something I've learned recently. It's not the shame itself that's the problem, because the shame is not real. It's just a disconnection from the truth. It's the fear that the shame might be real or might be true that keeps us running around trying to outrun our own shadow. And so if you want to get into the flow, which is really all the divine comedy is, just the flow of life on life's terms and your little place within it, that doesn't mean you have to be passive or surrender completely. You can still take real action. You can still express more of yourself, but it just means you have to move with the way things are instead of trying to fight it ultimately, right? And so if you're in that situation, the tragedy is seeming real, you're taking everything too seriously, you need to come back home, you need to return to yourself. You need to regulate and you need to integrate. A lot of my videos keep coming down to that recently, but it's so true. You regulate first and then you integrate. Then you can accelerate by moving with the flow, moving with the comedy instead of against it. When you start with a policy of regulation first, you regulate the nervous system as a default mode, then you get over the illusion of I am not safe. You can feel your feelings. You can take the action you need to take. You can ride through uncertainty. You can do all the things that the real you actually wants to do without that mask causing you to judge yourself in life. So always start with that. Take a policy of regulation first. Learn to breathe properly. Breathe through your nose consistently. Go for walks in nature. Do some yin yoga. I'm going to do a live yin yoga class sometime soon. I keep talking about yin yoga, but everyone should try yin yoga. It's the best thing I've found to become regulated. There's millions of different things you can do. You got to find something that works for you. But the point is, you got to start with that foundation of regulation, because when you feel safe in yourself, you can handle the higher levels of integration and acceleration. Integrate your emotions just means that you process the feelings that you're feeling. You process your emotions. Process your emotions sometimes sounds complicated. It sounds like you have to do some scientific wizardry or something like that, but all it literally means is that you feel your feelings. You don't resist them when they pop up and then run away behind all kinds of control freakery type strategies to distract you from your actual emotions. If you look around you and you look at yourself, you'll see that a lot of the time when that feeling that shame puts within us of I am not good enough as I am starts to pop up, then we won't just feel it, we'll try and run away from it. We'll start doom scrolling on our phones. We'll call somebody to talk to about something we don't really need to talk about. We'll do all kinds of different things to avoid feeling the feelings that we need to feel. Blaise Pascal once said that most of man's problems would be solved if he could just sit alone in a quiet room for a little while. I think that's so true. When you find the stillness, what you need to feel starts coming up, and you spend some time with it and it dissolves, because emotions are emotion, energy, and motion. As long as you're not getting in your own way with mental blocks that are caused by the ego, making you think you're something other than you actually are, and that life is something other than what it is, and then having the nervous system see it all as a threat. When you don't allow that to happen, and you just get into the stillness, you can feel what you need to feel, you can feel safe as you do it, if you've done the regulation first thing, and it dissolves, and you see that it's exactly what I'm saying. Bullshit, an illusion, because you are good enough as you are, and when you accept that, and get in touch with your essence, then you can start to really express it and put yourself in the divine comedy. The more you learn to regulate and integrate, the more you can start laughing at things instead of taking everything so seriously. First and foremost, you can start laughing at yourself. You can laugh at all of those expectations you had when you were younger that you bought into about how you're supposed to be superhuman and perfectionistic. You can laugh at how you're trying to live up to that and fucked up time and time again. You can laugh at your mistakes. You can laugh at the shadow qualities about yourself. Maybe you're too sarcastic, maybe you're an asshole, maybe you got some personality defects. In fact, there's no maybe about it. You definitely have a personality defect. You can laugh at it instead of thinking that it's so serious and that it defines you and that you're just doomed to the life of tragedy because the defect is insurmountable and there's nothing you can do about it. When you start to laugh at things, you can start to release them. That's how you know you're starting to heal, because the laughter releases all of the tension that you carry inside yourself. And the tension that you carry inside yourself always comes from wearing the mask of the ego, from being unreal. When we're unreal, it always feels like some kind of tension. And if our nervous system's dysregulated, our bodies get tense because we get ready for action, if we're in hyperarousal anyway, fight or flight. And when we've got the shame of I'm not good enough, we have to take everything so seriously because the mask doesn't want to be breached. We don't want anything to come through the mask. We don't want anything to come through our experience of life that's going to show us that the mask is not true. Because if the mask is not true, the ego is not true, then all the things we've been hiding in the shadow self actually are true. And when we fear those things, well, it's the worst thing in the world. But when we learn to laugh at them, then we can release them, if releasing them is part of the plan, or we can integrate them as part of who we are without having to worry about what it means. And so the more you learn to laugh by realizing that you're already safe and knowing that you're already enough, the more real you can become, because you don't have to disown the parts of yourself that cause you to act too seriously. Instead, you can just embrace them as part of who you are, see the funny side, and then move forward with levity instead of weighing yourself down with tension that doesn't even need to be there in the first place. One thing I discovered kind of accidentally the other day in meditation is I was in the meditation, I was in my breath, and I started thinking about some things that have gone wrong recently. And at first, I suppose I did have the tension. It was weighing me down. I was taking it so seriously. But then I stepped back and I just started laughing at what an idiot I'd been. I started laughing at this mistake I made. I started laughing like aloud at just how funny everything is when you realize that we're just here on this huge planet, this as a little speck of life that is destined to eventually come to an end. When you take it so seriously, you just ruin your own life, because it's not your life anymore. And so what I would really encourage you to do is try and find a way to start laughing at all of the things, especially about yourself, that you're currently taking too seriously. Try and see the joke, because even though you might think we're not supposed to laugh at everything, like literally everything, that's just a misperception. Because the only options are really, like I've said throughout this whole video, you either laugh or you cry. And I know which one I'd rather do, and I know which one has released more in my life, so that I can keep going deeper into life and showing up as my real self. And really, that's what this whole thing is all about. You're either unreal or you're real. If you choose to be unreal, then you're just going to weigh yourself down with tension that doesn't need to be there, and you're going to block your own flow of life. Life is precious, really. We're not here for very long, and if you want to make the most of it, you need to embrace that, because that's part of the joke in itself, that time is up eventually, and you're either going to die with a smile on your face or having been weighed down by a tragedy that didn't even really exist in the first place. When you start to embrace the fact that the tragedy is really just a misperception of the ego, then you can let go and you can put yourself back in the divine comedy, in the great big cosmic joke. You might not get the punchline, because maybe we don't even know what the punchline is until it's all over and we die, but you will get to flow with it, and you'll feel that buzz of being alive. You'll feel the tension, you'll feel the freedom of knowing that you took the mask off and you didn't resist the call to adventure, to face yourself in life and to keep the smile on your face. And if that sounds cheesy, well, so be it, because it's true. Life is fucking amazing and it's awesome, and the only thing most of the time that's holding us back from it is taking the joke too seriously. So if you take one thing from this video, it's that don't be so serious. You're already safe, you're already enough, and knowing that is the path back to realness. Peace.